Welcome back. This is Rich again, back for an exclusive YouTube video blog. This YouTube video blog is about the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams right now in the four major professional sports in North America: Major League Baseball, National Football League, National Hockey League, and the National Basketball Association. I'll tell you the teams that I think are the most irrelevant in sports right now. But first, these important messages of interest. Don't forget to listen to Crystal's Time Machine each and every Friday and Saturday night from 9 to 11 p.m. on WCAP 980, where everybody gets it. Can't catch the show live, listen to podcasts exclusively on archive.org. Goes back to October 2015. Follow Crystal on Twitter at Crystal Amy John and Machine Crystal. Follow her on Instagram at Crystal Johnson. Follow her on Facebook, the official Crystal's Time Machine Facebook page, the official Crystal's Time Machine group page, and Game Show fan page, and follow and say hello to Broadway Pizza, the official sponsor of Crystal's Time Machine. If you say the promo code Crystal's Time Machine, $2 off your meal. And also follow Crystal on YouTube, one exclusive video a week, usually on Saturday. Okay? And now back to the future presentation. Okay, here are my top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in the major professional sports in North America right now. Number 10 on this list is the Charlotte Hornets. Ever since the Hornets came back into the NBA in 2004, they were the Bobcats from 2004 to 2014. They have been one of the worst teams in the NBA. They don't make the playoffs too much. They don't have too much talent, and they have an eroding fan base. Even Michael Jordan owned Hornets for several years until he got out because he stinks as an owner. And there's rumblings going around that Charlotte might not be viable long term for the NBA, which is very, very sad. The original incarnation of the Hornets had some talented players, including Larry Johnson, or Alonzo Mourning, Del Curry, Muggsy Bogues, and a few others. Number 9 on this list of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America right now is the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards have been around over 60 years. They were originally the Chicago Zephyrs and the Chicago Packers. In the early 60s, they moved to Baltimore to become the Baltimore Bullets. And their heyday was in the 1970s. They made several NBA finals. They even won an NBA World Championship in 1978, and they moved from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. They were actually called the Capitol Bullets 1 year, and then they became the Washington Bullets, and they had their most successful player was Wes Unseld. He actually won MVP his rookie year, but this is at the time the NBA was not popular, and he was overshadowed by players like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Dr. J. Julius Erving, Bob McAdoo, Nate Tiny Archibald, and Dave Cowens, among others. In the 1980s, the Bullets were competitive. They made the playoffs 12 straight years, but most of the time after post 1979, they would always get bounced in the first round. They had some good players. They had all-star players like Jeff Malone and Jeff Ruland, which, if they played for a team like the Knicks or the Bulls, they would probably be Hall of Famers. The Bullets went through a dark period in the late 1980s and early 1990s. They signed washed-up players like Moses Malone and Bernard King. In 1994, they acquired Chris Webber. They had some good pieces, Jerry Stackhouse and Rasheed Wallace. They actually made the playoffs in 1997. They were rebranded as the Washington Wizards, moving to the new downtown MCI Center, which is now Capital One Arena. And they actually were mediocre. Even Michael Jordan played for them for 2 years. He actually owned part of the team for a few years, but it wasn't acknowledged in the documentary The Last Dance. And the most recent kind of success for the Wizards were in like 2010s with John Wall and Bradley Beal. They actually made Game 7 of the 2017 Eastern Conference semifinals against Celtics, but they lost. Wall eventually left the team, and Beal left as well, and they're in a full rebuild. And they're going to move to Virginia. They'll probably be rebranded as the Virginia Wizards before long. Also, number 8 of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America, the Colorado Rockies baseball team. They've been around 31 years. And Coors Field is a mile high. They have so many good offensive players, but they can't develop pitching. They've only had very little success, actually making the playoffs a handful of times, never winning a division. And some of the players that passed through Colorado include Andres Galarraga, Dante Bichette, Ellis Burks, Carlos Gonzalez, Charlie Blackmon, and two of their best, Nolan Arenado, Vinny Castilla, and two of their best players of all time, Larry Walker and Todd Helton. But it seems that the Rockies, when they're not making the playoffs or finishing barely above 500, they're battling for one of the worst teams in the National League. And the Rockies probably will never win a World Series unless if they develop pitching. Number 7 on this list of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America right now is the Oakland A's, soon to be Las Vegas A's. The A's were a very successful franchise back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They won 4 world championships. They had some great players over the years. Reggie Jackson, Joe Rudi, Catfish Hunter, Lolly Finger, Sal Banto, Jose Canseco, Mark McGuire, Ricky Henderson, Dave Stewart, and they had good managers including Dick Williams and Tony La Russa. In the 2000s, they had Moneyball with Billy Beane with the Sabermetrics, and they always would be a perennial playoff participant. They would always get bounced early. I think they only won maybe 2-3 playoff series in 20 years. But when John Fisher owned the team, he just basically gave up on the Bay Area, and the Oakland Coliseum or Green Central Coliseum's a dump, and they're moving out to Las Vegas. Very, very sad. Number 6 on this list of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America right now, the Ottawa Senators. The Ottawa Senators had some decent success as an expansion team back in the late 90s and early 2000s after going through 4 years of hell when they started in the NHL, losing a lot of games. And they had decent talent during the late 90s and 2000s, including Daniel Alfredson, Jason Spezza, Alexis Yashin, Radek Bonk, and Zdeno Chara. Later on, they actually were like contenders in the Eastern Conference of the NHL, always making playoffs for maybe 10 straight years. And they actually made a cup final in 2007, but they lost in 5 games. And then they kind of was 1 year they were good. Next year they didn't miss the playoffs into 2010s, even though they had Erik Karlsson, two-time Norris Trophy winner for them. They were one goal away from the Stanley Cup Finals in 2017, but then it just came crashing down. The owner, Eugene Maggetti, just did not like the stadium, the arena the Senators were playing. It's north of the city, and they want a new downtown arena, but that was slow. Eugene passed away in 2023, and the Senators are going through kind of an endless rebuild, even though they have acquired, locked up some good young talent that they drafted and developed. It hasn't done much success, and I think the fans in the nation's capital of Canada is getting tired of endless rebuilds. They really need a new arena in downtown Ottawa, but who knows if they're going to get it. Also, number 5 on this list of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America right now is the Washington Commanders. The Washington Commanders were once the Washington Redskins. They were a very successful franchise in the first 25 years of the NFL Super Bowl era, most of the success was led by Coach Joe Gibbs, winning Super Bowl 18, 22, and 26 with 3 different quarterbacks at the helm each Super Bowl. But in 1993, they went through years of being a bad to mediocre team. Daniel Snyder bought them in 1999, and it had very few playoff appearances. But they would always finish under 500 at last place in the NFC East. And 2020, they had to change the name to the Washington Football Team because of the name Redskins being offensive for Native Americans. 2022, they were rebranded as Washington Commanders, but Daniel Snyder sold the team to Josh Harris and Magic Johnson, and they're going to be rebuilding a team, and they play in one of the worst stadiums in the NFL, FedEx Field, and there's talk about them moving back to DC, building a super stadium at the old site of RFK. And I think they're going to change the name to Commanders and rebrand it to another name because that Commanders name probably was an FU from Daniel Snyder to the NFL. Number 4 on this list of the top 10 irrelevant franchises in sports today is the New York Jets. The New York Jets have been very bad for years and on end. They've had very little success, winning Super Bowl III when Joe Namath guaranteed victory. But ever since joining in 1970, it was just been very mediocre at best. They've had a couple of decent years, but it seems like they are cursed with quarterbacks. And even though Aaron Rodgers now plays for them, he tore his Achilles, and it could be years before the Jets are relevant, and they might get their own stadium for the first time ever, which that would be pretty good. Number 3 on this list of the top 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North America today, the Arizona Coyotes. The Arizona Coyotes have been around since 1972 when they were the Winnipeg Jets of the WHA. They had success in the WHA, and when they went into the NHL, they had some decent success, but they had some good players, including Dale Hawerchuk, but they were stuck in the division with the Oilers in the 80s, so they couldn't advance very far. In the 90s, they had Teemu Selanne, but the Winnipeg arena was outdated and they could not get a new arena, so they moved to Phoenix, Arizona. For the first 7 years, they played at Footprint Center, which had so much obstructive views of the ice, and they had decent success, but they would get bounced in the first round, and then the ownership had money problems. Even Wayne Gretzky owned the team at one time. He even coached the team. 2009, the NHL took over ownership, and there were yearly rumors that they were going to move to Quebec City, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, back to Winnipeg, Houston, Salt Lake City, Kansas City. They got an arena in Glendale in 2003, but they had problems paying rent to them, and they were originally the Phoenix Coyotes. In 2014, they got rebranded to Arizona Coyotes. They got kicked out of their arena in Glendale in 2022, and they tried to get a new arena in Tempe, but that was voted down. They play in a college arena, 5,000, and that's not suitable long term for an NHL team. And they're trying to get maybe another arena proposal in Mesa, but they're running out of options. I think this team's going to be moving to Salt Lake City or San Diego soon. Number 2 on this list of the 10 most irrelevant sports teams in North American sports right now is the Buffalo Sabres. Sabres came into the NHL in 1970. They had a decent success with Gilbert Priant and Rene Roberts and Richard Martin, the French Connection line, and they had some good goaltending. Tom Barrasso. They actually made the Stanley Cup Finals in 1975, but they got bounced by the Flyers. Their best successful run was from between 1993 to 2001, when Dominic Casket was the goaltender, the Dominator, winning several Vezina trophies and the league's MVP. Michael Peca on defensive forward, and he even had Pat LaFontaine. They made the Stanley Cup Finals in 1999, but they got bounced by Dallas 6 games. Brett Hull was in the crease when he scored off of Dominic Hasek. The NHL blew that call, and they should have won the Stanley Cup that year. They almost were extinct in 2003 because of the Riggins family were frauds. And they had a little bit of success in like the late 2000s, making 2 Eastern Conference Finals. But since 2011, they haven't made the playoffs, and it seems like endless rebuild after rebuild after rebuild. They had Jack Eichel for a few years, but he didn't like Buffalo, and they could continue to rebuild, which is the fans in Buffalo are probably getting tired of the endless rebuild. And number 1 on this list of the most irrelevant sports teams in North America is the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons had a lot of success in the late 80s and early 1990s. The Bad Boys with Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, Joe Dumas, and a few others. And in the 2000s, they had decent success, making 6 Eastern Conference Finals in a row, winning the NBA championship in 2004. The LA Lakers, Chauncey Billups, and Ben Wallace were part of that team, but since 2008, they only made the playoffs 3 times, and each time they were bounced in the first round sweep. And this team, even though they have Cade Cunningham, it seems like the talent's not there. They had a 28-game losing streak this season, and the future's not bright for Detroit. And that's about it on that. Leave a comment in the section. Thank you for support. I'll be back again soon.